So today is going to be a real interesting episode of Things Hidden. We're talking with Blake Masters. He's the co-author of the famous book on startups 0 to 1 with Peter Thiel. He's also working as a candidate, first-time candidate in the U.S. Senate race in Arizona, where a lot of people are paying attention with great detail. How you doing, Blake?
Doing great. Great to see you again. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and I wanted to, we're recording this on Good Friday, so I wanted to hit it off with an interesting angle here. You know that we share an interest in Rene Gerard's work and mimetic theory. You probably don't get asked about mimetic theory a lot on the campaign trail, first of all, right?
Not so much. Yeah.
Nope.
Not so much.
Welcome to my world. This is where we get interesting for this stuff. So that day, this is in the book of Luke, chapter 23, verse 12. It says, that day Herod and Pilate became friends. Before this, they had been enemies. And it's in reference to Jesus being put on trial, where you have two factions which were normally at war with one another. Now they're working together. And I thought, here on Good Friday, that kind of reminds me of what we see in Washington right now, where you have two factions that are supposed to be enemies, Republicans and Democrats, but in reality, through their persecution of the common person in America and abroad, for that matter, it seems like they've got a really cozy friendship that they've developed.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I'd never made that connection before, but it immediately sort of registers, right?
Yeah. The reason why I bring it up is because you want to shake things up in the Republican Party and in the U.S. Senate. Why did you choose to go right for the Senate? Why not, local office or U.S. the House of Representatives? Why did you want to go right into the belly of the beast of the establishment?
Well, I mean, it seems important. It seemed, kind of like this unique opportunity. I'm not looking for a career in politics. I'm not obsessed with this idea of starting at some level and working my way up. I saw this Senate seat, and I thought, man, no one is going to beat Mark Kelly but me. Mark Kelly is the incumbent Democrat in Arizona, and what an opportunity that is for the country, right? Because I think the Democrat leadership has just completely failed. All too often, to your point, David, the Republican establishment is just willing to go right along with the Democrats, and all the destruction that they're causing. And so I thought, man, like, let me take my skills that I've sort of learned in the private sector, business skills. Let me go in and win this thing, and then really just see how much one person can do to shake things up. I thought I could not just win, but really be effective once I get there, and I still truly believe that.
So how do you plan to differentiate yourself from the establishment in a way that doesn't make you ostracized? People like Ron Paul went up there and they wanted to make a point, but they were never able to get any legislation passed except for a few things here or there, maybe. How do you plan to stand on the principles that you believe in and make a point, but also get things done?
Yeah, I think, you basically have to be the right combination of insider and outsider. If you're purely an outsider, right, the system will reject you. If you're just a bomb thrower, right? I mean, just like that, your body rejects an organ, if the transplant isn't done properly, or if it's the wrong blood type or something like that. And so you gotta know how the system works, and it's not a pretty system, right? It's not. It is in theory, and in practice it's sort of disgusting and corrupt. And so there's a real tension. But how do I, without becoming corrupt, without what you said, sacrificing my principles, go in and show people within the system that, like, it doesn't work, and here's the direction that we need to go, right? We wrote about this in 0 to 1, the chapter on founders of important technology companies, people who really do something new. And I think this is just as true in politics as it is in business. You have to be both an outsider, who the establishment rejects, but also enough of an insider to A, win, and B, get in and start whipping votes, right? And so I think we need, for example, just one of many examples, a digital Bill of Rights, that says you own your data. Giant left-wing multinationals like Facebook and Twitter don't own your data. Let's codify a Bill of Rights. I'm not going to get that passed in the first year. Even the first year when we have a Republican presidency, probably, because too many establishment Republicans won't go for it. But I think I'm insider enough to get in and win and draft it and be taken seriously, and outsider enough to actually have this motivating animus. Like, let's get this done, because if not, we're not going to have free speech. We're not going to have free and fair elections. And so I know it's going to be hard, but like I said, let's see how much one person can do when they're not beholden to the system.
Would you be open to using things like the filibuster and other techniques to get things done?
Well, I don't think we should get rid of the filibuster. I think it's pretty important. I think for major legislation, it's probably pretty good to require 60 votes. If not, then the next time the Democrats take power, they'll ruin the country. I want a digital Bill of Rights, and I think we really need that. But if in 4 years, then a Democrat won, they'd come in and they'd make irreversible changes, right? They'd pack the Supreme Court, they'd federalize elections, they'd add new states to the union. They'd love to do that. They'll never get 60 votes for that, which is why they're hell bent on destroying the filibuster. I'm optimistic. I think I can get 60 votes in the next 5 years for a digital Bill of Rights. I think on the right, our agenda is so commonsensical that with the right messengers and with just relentless energy, we can get 60 votes for it, because it's what the American people want. The Democrats' agenda is so ghastly, I don't think they'll ever find 60 votes for it, which is why I think the filibuster net benefits the right.
But would you yourself ever use the filibuster yourself to employ, a technique?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, in the Senate, and I'm still...
You can stand for a long time and read the Bible on the Senate floor. You could do that?
Yeah. And there's a lot of parliamentary procedural rules that an individual senator with guts can pull. And most of them don't do it. Most of them, it's just the party leadership sends out an email. Here's what's happening. Object if you want, but we'll look down on that and it'll cost you. And so people kind of fall in line.
That opens up another line of thought. What about your background as a entrepreneur will allow you to be able to navigate the arcane parliamentary procedures at your disposal? I mean, those are kind of like different worlds in some ways, right?
Different worlds, but I also trained as a lawyer.
Okay.
So I'm used to. And I nerd out on that stuff. I'll actually read every bill myself. One bill I want to push, actually, it's just this commonsensical idea that any law, any new bill shouldn't be like more than 50 pages. You get these 5,000-page omnibus spending bills, and then nobody has time to read it, literally, before Congress votes on it, right?
Is that one subject at a time? Is that the one subject at a time act or something like that?
There's the subject version, which I also think is a good idea, one subject at a time. And then there's just a physical length limit. Have a spending bill, sure, but it's going to be 50 pages. You might be spending on a bunch of different things, but you got to have time to read the bill. So there's probably multiple different ways to attack that problem. But this idea that you can have a 3,000-page omnibus bill, it's obviously just an invitation for special interests and lobbyists to go and tuck things in. And no surprise when that yields a really crappy, corrupt system.
So I want to ask a broader question for a moment here, because there's a debate within the Republican Party and conservatism as to what is the direction for the future. And there's a tension that's been put out there between, say, liberty, values, free market, limited government versus this new right, populism, nationalism. I don't see how those things need to be in tension. I think there's a way to harmonize a lot of those, the best of both worlds. I don't think they need to be, it's either one or the other. You know what I mean? Do you see the same way there, that broader debate?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think people get excited about trying to make some taxonomy and, this is the new right. And this is I really don't look at it that way. I let other people talk about that. I'm just saying, I think there's common ground on the right on most things. Okay. We got to, get immigration under control, finish the walls, secure the border, right? If you don't believe in that, you're not on the right. That's just it. Finish the walls, secure the border. Crime is out of control. I think everybody whether you're a Reagan Republican or on the so-called new right, you got to acknowledge crime is absolutely out of control. We got to stop the Biden crime wave. We need strong national defense. This may be the biggest point of contention. There's sort of still a hawkish part of the Republican Party and a relatively non-interventionist part. But even then, I think everybody agrees you need strong national defense. You need a strong military. You need to project strength, not weakness from the White House. And everybody should be able to agree, like the way Joe Biden got out of Afghanistan, right? It's not just humiliating on the international stage. It didn't just kill those 13 brave service members, although that's horrible. But it was really dangerous because it emboldens our enemies, right? It emboldens Putin. And so even people on the new right, I think, have a lot to criticize there, right? And so I'm not seeing the gap that people are seeing. Maybe another big gap is trade. You still have some free trade with China Republicans, but honestly, I think President Trump showed the whole nation, including the Republican Party, that all that is outdated. There's no such thing as free trade with China. Yeah, we want to be a pro-business economy. Yeah, some trade is good, but you got to be able to make the basics right here in America. You can't be beholden to foreign interests in terms of your supply chain. And China's a communist dictatorship, right? Mm-hmm. There's no free trade. They're always putting their thumb on the scale. They're always subsidizing their domestic industry. And yeah, you might need pretty big tariffs to level the playing field. I think most Republicans now understand that.
So one of the big things that you don't hear about a lot in the kind of new Republican Party is any desire to substantially downsize DC. In the 2012 primary in the Republican Party, they were talking about, I want to cut 3 departments. I want to abolish 5 departments. I want to, they were all competing over how many agencies they wanted to abolish. That is out of style now. But the problem is, and I understand why, they never do anything with that. So they just say it and then they never do it. But how do we deal with things like inflation? You've got, it could be what, north of 10% a year now. I mean, we can talk about, opening up domestic oil production. That's one thing that all the Republicans say. But how do you actually tackle inflation without having dramatic cuts in government spending? Or is that your solution?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to put the cat back in the bag. Exactly. The first thing to do, I think, is to stop the bleeding, right? Stop printing so much money. It's kind of hilarious and just economically illiterate, but the Democrats' explanation for inflation is literally a bunch of greedy businessmen all, conspire together to raise prices at the same time. Isn't that horrible? And it's like, guys, do you think there could be a monetary cause here? And they're like, no. Do you think that it could have something to do with the $6 trillion that you just printed in the last year? No, it couldn't. It's obviously we're printing too much money. And so if we stop signing on to these crazy Joe Biden spending budgets, you can at least stop compounding the problem, right? I agree with what you said, right? Expanding domestic energy production. Energy is sort of the master resource. And if you can make that safely, cheaply, abundantly here at home, energy is kind of an input into everything else. Everything else ought to get cheaper too. But no, I think it's a mess. And look, do we overall need to cut government spending in the next 10 years? Absolutely. And then how to do that turns out to be really hard. Some of my opponents in my race are running around saying we got to cut entitlement spending. And I think they think that means it's like a red meat thing that, the electorate wants. And maybe in some abstract sense, the electorate does want that. But then if you drill down, like, well, what's entitlement spending? Social Security for seniors, right? Medicare. People have paid into these programs and are relying on them. And so you can't pull the rug out from anybody who's reasonably expecting to draw on Social Security anytime soon, right? You and me, we're considerably younger, not close to retirement age. So yeah, maybe we'll never get Social Security. And there's going to be some hard decisions in the future. But right now with this immediate inflation, can we just please stop the bleeding, right? And then we can figure out how to put the pieces back together.
One thing I like, and I wanted to ask your take on it, is getting rid of capital gains taxes on gold and silver and crypto, so that middle-class people and, young people like myself, we don't, we may not be able to, do the fancy things to hedge against inflation. But if we could buy a little bit of junk silver or a little bit of 1 ounce of gold every year or 2 years or so forth, and not have it taxed, that allows us to have a hedge against inflation that will protect the middle class, so that they don't have to be stuck, using a US dollar that's going to be depreciating in value every year at 10% or higher while they keep it in the bank. And if they have to be gambling their life away by going on the stock market and playing BlackRock's game and Vanguard's game. We don't want to play that game. We just want to be able to have money that actually has value. So something that would be a big benefit for a lot of young families is being able to say, hey, look, you can keep your gold and silver and we're going to remove the capital gain so you can kind of have it as an alternative savings account.
I like that a lot. I like that idea a lot. I think I'd run with that. I also, I'm into cryptocurrency. I think I kind of as a, amateur hobbyist. I mean, I just think it's cool technology, but on the political side, I think it's, quite possibly if things go bad here in the next few decades, I think crypto and sort of decentralized financial technology might actually be crucial for individual rights in this country. In an age where the central bank and woke banks like Wells Fargo and Chase, man, they just want to push a button and they would cancel. They would love to freeze our checking accounts, because we lean right. And I think we're getting there. I mean, Canada showed us that they'll do this, right? And so I think crypto is important, and the ability to sort of trade in and out of cryptocurrencies without triggering tax events. I think it's pretty crazy that you can't do that, right? I've got a Bitcoin. I want to translate it to Ethereum. It should just be you're taxed on the way out when you convert your crypto winnings back to US dollars.
I guess my point is if we're never going to, well, not never, but if we're not going to have any opportunity to really substantially downsize DC anytime soon, given the situation we're in politically, the best off ramp to this inflationary economy would be allowing people to have their own savings accounts in gold and silver and crypto. That's the best chance you could give the middle class to get off of the Titanic.
I think that's right. And look, I'm a little bit more optimistic. I think we can have political checks on this stuff. Like, I want to go in and be a political check on the Fed, right? But I acknowledge, like, hey, that's going to be hard, and victory is not guaranteed. I think if you don't get people like me in, then you have a certain loss. It's just not going to happen. But you get people like me in, we'll fight like hell. Maybe we'll have a chance. But say I'm unable to do it. Say that for whatever reason we aren't able to have a political check on the Fed. Well, thank goodness for Bitcoin, right? This decentralized, basically digital gold, not a perfect metaphor, but pretty good. And that could provide a technological check on the Fed, right? If it doesn't, then it's still good for people because the Fed's, doing runaway inflation and people, middle-class savers can have Bitcoin. But you could imagine it actually having a healthy effect on the Fed, where if investors finally have a safe haven that's uncancelable, that could exert some pressure on the Fed not to just, keep the presses going. And so I'm kind of optimistic that Bitcoin could, not just be good for middle-class savers, but can actually help shore up the dollar long term. If it doesn't, it's a great insurance policy. And if it does, that's good for everybody.
So you would support Audit the Fed bill?
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's something about Audit the Fed that will always have a soft spot in my heart. It's the Ron Paul 07-08 thing. There's something about it that seems a little outdated, but I think the modern version is just audit everything.
Right.
Can we audit the Department of Education? Can we audit the Department of? I would love to see all the wasteful spending. I want to audit the Fed. Do we actually have any gold? What's going on in there? But I'll run a bill every year to just have every government department, certainly every cabinet level department, audited. You're going to audit? Are
you going to audit that unidentified aerial phenomenon program in the Pentagon?
I would love to. What's up with that, by the way? A lot of people are scared that it's aliens, and I'm like, no, you better pray that aliens, actually, because there's two choices, right? If you believe the government that those UFOs are not, our own military technology, that leaves two choices. One, it's aliens, or two, it's advanced enemy adversary technology, probably Chinese, right? And I really worry that China has some quantum leap in the kind of drones that they're able to fly in the Pacific Ocean. What if they're trying to figure out and identify where our, nuclear submarines are? The nuclear submarines are the one part of the nuclear triad that no one knows where they are, right? We know where the airplanes are. You can track airplanes with radar. Everybody knows where our um, where our missiles are, the launch bases and stuff. But the nuclear submarines, you can't tell. Well, I really fear that China is leapfrogging us in military technology. And if they're able to one day just know where our ballistic subs are, we're really caught behind. That will be a startling intelligence and military failure. So I almost hope that this stuff is aliens, because I think that'd be less dangerous than the Chinese being able to leapfrog us in military tech.
Well, if they've got some kind of anti-gravity propulsion technology, Blake, I don't think they'd be putting up with a lot of the stuff America's, Washington, D.C. foreign policy. I think they'd be a little bit more gruff in their pushback, maybe, they'd be taking Taiwan a lot long ago,
We'll see. I think they're patient. I think, they're thinking 10 years ahead. Yeah, it's possible to exoticize and romanticize. China's got a lot of problems. Look, they're basically having some kind of like civil crack up right now, right? You look at what's happening in Shanghai. I think they're very focused on just trying to keep the lid on the pot, not having things boil over. But they're serious about military tech. I agree. I don't think that they're actually responsible for those UFOs. But
here's an interesting thing, because I talked to Lou Elizondo, the guy that did the ATIP program, and he's the whistleblower. And one point that he's made is that, the same Tic Tac type objects that they've seen recently at buzzing Navy ships, those are reported as flying lozenges. That's the term they used back then in the 1950s and 60s by Air Force pilots. So we know that if that's the same technology they were seeing back then, we know that couldn't have been from China, because they were dealing with famines and stuff back then. So they didn't have time to do flying lozenges, as the people back then called them in their Air Force, reports. Sure. So that's an interesting thing, right? It's like a detective.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely is. And I guess the weirdest thing about this now is, like, we have video. I mean, we have confirmed reports, right? Like, it's not just, how most UFO reports have gone down over time. It's like, there are all these grainy photos from the 60s and everybody and their mother saw a UFO, and then now the smartphone gets invented, and like every of the 3 billion smartphone connected people could easily take a photo of any phenomenon they see, and you never see any photos of UFOs anymore. So reports have generally gone down, just like no one sees the Loch Ness monster anymore. But what's fascinating about this stuff off the coast of California is, like, you've got career Navy aviators who were not just swearing that they've seen something weird, right? Something that appears to defy the law of physics, but they have photos, they have video. Like, this is documented, right? The New York Times admits this exists. The federal government admits this exists. No, we don't know what's going on. We better study that. So
you talk about
the most likely explanation still is it's domestic military research projects.
Well, whoever has that technology, though, they need to share it with the rest of us, because that's some serious privilege right there. I call that gray privilege, because they say these aliens are gray. Whoever has that, they've got gray privilege or alien privilege, because you've got some serious people down here who could use some other kind of propulsion system besides filling up the gas tank. I can tell you that,
Yep. We will see.
I want to shift here to another topic that's in the news a lot: food. Are you familiar with Congressman Massey's Prime Act, which would deregulate and allow local small farmers to sell directly to customers across state lines and open up the market for mom and pop processors of meat?
Massey's great. I'm not familiar with the details of that, just the broad brushstrokes you painted, and it sounds great. Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, that's something that I think would be very important right now, especially with food prices going up. And you have these industrial networks all across the world with fertilizer and everything. When you have local farmers, you bypass fertilizer spikes going on in Ukraine and Russia war. You bypass a lot of this top-heavy World War II era food supply system, and you decentralize it. I think this would be an opportunity if you would get behind this in the Senate to help liberate families across the political spectrum. We all know the left loves going to their farmers markets, and being able to have a better opportunity to afford local agriculture, I think, would help people with the rising costs of supermarket food.
I agree. And this is an interesting area where left meets right. The left wingers love their supermarket or the farmers markets. Well, a lot of people, especially on the so-called new right, are pretty interested in these questions too, right? And it should be more about keeping dollars in your local community, right? Knowing who produce this food, right? Not just kind of trusting and outsourcing everything to this, sort of more globalist, anonymous supply chain. And so I support that a lot, and there's a theological cut here too, right? I'm Catholic, and it's the principle of subsidiarity, which basically just means decentralization. Some people think that's ironic because the church, of course, is the ultimate centralized institution. But no, there's this principle that, a village shouldn't do what an individual can do. And a small village, shouldn't do what an individual can do. A big village shouldn't do what a small village can do, and all the way up the chain. And so I do think, at the level of the household, at the level of a local community, then at the level of the state, right? We have a federalist version of this. You want problems solved, and they get solved most cheaply and effectively when they're solved at the lowest level appropriate. And I think it's really crazy right now that, one geopolitical, butterfly can happen 10,000 miles away, and all of a sudden they can mean like you don't have any tomatoes.
And then you had those hackings. Remember the hacks that were going on attacking the 5 meat suppliers that provide what an oligarchic system that is.
Yeah, so, it's like maybe the meat that you enjoy should by default come from within 100 miles of your house. Depends on where you live and geography. And look, I'm not anti-trade, right? But outsourcing everything to these woefully thin supply chains, it's kind of a recipe for disaster, as we've seen. And so, I support sort of local agriculture and reminding people to really invest in their communities. Don't just get everything on Amazon. You should know your neighbors. You should know the people who live around you. You live in a political community. And if you don't invest in making it a good one, it's not going to be so good.
Why do you think the establishment is so obsessed with us eating plant-based goop and crickets and things like that?
Well, I guess the least sinister way to explain it would just be they're covering for their own failure, right? If the supply chains are going to be so weak, if it's going to be so dominated by 4 meat packers, and they're going to be subject to, to all sorts of sabotage, and maybe you're not going to be able to have meat. And so then you want to start the PR campaign by saying, don't worry, right? Accept these lower living standards, and let's pretend that they're actually progress. And then I can think of a lot more sort of sinister versions of it. But what it is unmistakably is decline, right? Cars have gotten smaller and worse. I guess our housing's gotten bigger, right? But somehow worse. I think new houses today are on net constructed more cheaply than houses constructed 150 years ago. And so I don't think that the extra room actually compensates for that. Food, right? I think the food, ever since they started pumping everything with canola oil, literally just synthetic oil that for the time in the 50s and the 60s, before they changed the acidity to make it palatable, was literally like illegal to put in food because it's not healthy. It's not good for people. Everything's kind of getting worse. And I think that the sort of globalist powers that be, the entrenched interests, they wage these relentless marketing campaigns to convince people that no, actually things are getting better. We're making progress. Now we're talking a lot about trans rights. So therefore everything is progress.
Talking about trans fats,
trans rights, trans. It's all good. Everything's about progress. And if you're not happy with this progress that we're delivering to you, then you're a bigot.
Right.
And I think most people now are waking up and saying like, man, we like modern antibiotics and electricity, but maybe all this stuff, right? Everything we're being sold as progress isn't quite working.
You just said a trigger word for me. You talked about canola oil. My show is one of the only programs in broadcast that's been talking about Rene Gerard and seed oils, and now it's trendy, So, I mean, we really put that on those two combinations. Amazing. Everybody talks about those things now. But I want to ask you on that note, toxic seed oil sludge, canola, cottonseed, soybean, all these toxic vegetable oils that come from these environmentally disastrous monoculture crops that, has a political chokehold on so much of our electoral process. These big food companies that push these products, they're cheap. And frankly, they're not meant to be food. These vegetable oils, they're driving the obesity. We've talked to, professors at UC Davis and some of the best scientists who have shown that actual seed oil consumption is the main driver for severe cases of COVID, even because it's such an inflammatory food. When you get an infection like COVID, when you have a lot of bioaccumulation of these seed oil products, these oxidative stress products, that it creates a massive environment for severe cases with COVID. So whether it's COVID with an acute disease or chronic diseases like obesity, diabetes, cancer, a lot of these things are linked to our government screwing up and literally going to war against our health, whether they know it or not. So what could you do? Would you be willing to challenge the food pyramid system and and really cut some of these subsidies to these soybean oils?
Absolutely. And I can't wait, frankly, to go in and investigate this stuff. Like we know this at this point, but like, where did the food pyramid come from? Right? Was that some sober analysis of, scientific research on health? No, it was just the product of, basically lobbying efforts from, big food. And I think you got to go in with eyes wide open here too, because it's not enough to just wish for good intentions, wish for people's health. I think Michelle Obama probably had good intentions when she tried to, upend everything about school lunches and make them more nutritious. But look at how that got captured, right? They took out like full fat milk. You had whole milk in schools. And so you get all these idiot nutrition experts to say, oh, saturated fat, full fat milk, that sounds horrible because fat is bad. No, we're going to cut it. And so they put in like low fat milk, maybe it's 2% or skim milk, but like with strawberry flavoring, right? And crap loads of sugar. They basically took something that was healthy and put in poison and then pat themselves on the back. It's obviously just horrible. I think, look, I'm a seed oil disrespecter and I'll continue to be one in the US Senate.
Yeah, very good. So I'm telling you, it's going to be huge, because once people find out how bad their health is wrecked, psoriasis, mental illnesses, and, it's not enough. People always dunk on the soy boys, but you really are a soy boy if you're for subsidizing soybean oil in your body. You know what I mean? So we've got
absolutely. And people see look, diabetes, right? Heart disease in this country. Those are the real epidemics. Mm-hmm. Okay. And you're not really supposed to talk about it, even though we have these very clear graphs about diseases of Western affluence. Why are we suffering? Part of it is people aren't moving their bodies enough in the sedentary lifestyle. Yeah. But I actually think what drives most of it is diet, is nutrition.
Right.
And you're just totally right. I think we're totally right on this stuff. Maybe people think it sounds a little kooky, and we're just going to be right. Just give us 20 years and this will be common sense.
I think it's going to be sooner than that. So buckle up. Dr. Kate Shanahan, who's a big proponent of understanding this, she said on my show that perhaps 90% of chronic disease incidences over the last 100 years could be laid at the feet of the rise of seed oil consumption. Because you go back to George Washington's days, they were eating loads of butter and lots of sugary apple pie. They were fine. They didn't have diabetes. It wasn't even in the literature until the last century, right? So this is the big elephant in the room. It's bigger than COVID when people figure out, oh my goodness. So you mean to tell me the left and right have been fighting over how much admixture state versus market corporations are going to have in this failing sick care system, when all we had to do was gut the soy boy lobby completely out of our system, and we could have solved a lot of these chronic diseases without having to figure out who's going to be paying for it? It's amazing. This is the kind of blue ocean thinking we need to have, I think.
I agree. It's interesting to hear you say that about the sugary apple pies. My guess is sugar consumption is still like somehow 20x higher now than it was in George Washington's day. I always put sugar mentally at the level of seed oils.
Well, sugar's actually reduced though in recent years because it's hit more, it's actually kind of plateaued, but the rise of these diseases continues to go up. So it's interesting.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I'm definitely not an expert on this. I just, if they tell me saturated fat is horrible and carbs are, great, or sugar's fine, and what you really want to watch out for is fat, I'm inclined to believe the opposite. I think that big food and sort of nutrition experts, they just don't know what they're talking about. And by the way, this is kind of, it's a meme, but it's funny. It's like, look at the health officials in the United States, look at, what is it? The trans associate director of Health and Human Services, right? Rachel something. These people look unwell, and so when a health bureaucrat looks sort of, diseased, they're not exactly paragons of health. And so why are people believing what they say? If you don't have a six-pack, if you're not like just thriving, then like, why am I not going to take your nutritional advice?
Right.
And it's just this tyranny of the expert class. Same with the COVID stuff, right? They're happy to prescribe all these rules and regulations, and then you see these people and like they don't do any of that stuff themselves. They're not actually worried about COVID. And so this tyranny of the expert class, where they say one thing and do another, I think the gig is up. I think people are waking up to how hypocritical and almost evil that is.
Would you also, in a likewise manner, rein in the FDA and open up some innovation in that space? So much of FDA approval is all contingent upon patents, which is why our government and media came out with big tobacco-style hit pieces against things like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin, all of whom are generic drugs, so they're off patent. They don't like public domain solutions, whether they're natural or pharmaceutical, to be given to people. So it starts from the foundation with an unscientific premise, which is we will allocate funding for the prestigious double-blind studies for things that can be patented. So that automatically precludes from scientific investigation things like vitamin D or hydroxychloroquine from being properly investigated. And that's a total crooked system.
Totally. Yep. It's, people stand to make a lot less money if you actually solve some of these health problems, right? It's like, do you really want to cure your patient? Because then they won't be your patient anymore. And I think a lot of good individual practitioners, a lot of good individual doctors are still in it for the right reasons. But you aggregate this system and all these incentives, and no, I think you're right. And that's not a conspiracy theory. It's like they hate ivermectin, they hate hydroxychloroquine, they hate anything that might be cheap and effective. That's a huge problem. I think one of the great things that President Trump doesn't get credit for is the right to try stuff that they push through FDA. It's just a start. And I think that all of the FDA's regulatory processes are probably just way too bureaucratic and way too expensive to take way too long. But at least on the sort of life-saving experimental drugs, right? They really got that program going. I think it's been super positive for innovation, and it's saved a lot of people's lives. And so how to debureaucratize the FDA sort of writ large, it's going to be hard, man, but we have to do it. How crazy is it that like Scott Gottlieb, right? The recent director of the FDA, as soon as his term is over, he just goes and joins the board of Pfizer. Right. And he's on TV every day saying about how you got to get your fourth booster. Right. He's not as bad as Fauci, but my gosh, all these people are just pushing this stuff. And one just suspects at the end of the day, it's not really about health for them. It's about control.
Yeah. I mean, as we've explored in this interview, my whole thing that I'm pushing people, and I think you're sounding like you're right on target with this, which is giving the middle class and the poor an off-ramp off of this declining, old-fashioned 20th century model of governance in society. Give people an off-ramp for their currency. Allow them to get out of the dollar system. If you can't cut government, let them get off of it so they don't have to get screwed over when the Titanic falls apart with inflation. And number two, get people out of the FDA system by allowing people to opt out of some of these one-size-fits-all, this is the king's decreed medicine, and if you don't like it, you're going to prison if you want to do something about it. Number three, allowing people to get out of the government 20th century model for food, giving people access to real food instead of seed oil sludge burgers. It's all about off ramps for me. I think that's the thing that's going to help the middle class. And that really unites the best of populism and liberty together.
Yep. I like that framing a lot. And, if we got the government out of doing that stuff, I think people would flourish more. And the government can get back to doing what it ought to be doing, right? Which is defending people's individual rights, defending the country militarily, right? It's all there enumerated in the Constitution. Why don't we listen to it? And so, this federal Leviathan is just too big. It's clunky. It doesn't work. And I think if you get new leaders in like me who understand this, right, who are able to have this conversation with you, we have a chance of sort of steering this thing back to sanity. If we don't, then eventually this machine is just going to get so big and so crazy, and it's going to blow up, and it's going to be really chaotic.
If elected, you would probably be perhaps the first, or maybe one of the first members of the U.S. Congress who is a student of the French anthropologist Rene Gerard, who taught at Stanford, where you went, right? And you're a fan of his work, as you know, and it's a technical question for a broader audience, but it is something that has a lot of energy online. How would you bring Rene Girard's impact and lessons in your life to governance in Congress?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, and I'm not as much of a Gerard scholar as sort of many people in our circles, but the biggest thing that I take from his work is just always be questioning whether what you're doing is sort of the right thing, whether it makes sense, or whether more likely you've fallen into some pattern of, mimetic rivalry, mimetic competition, and you're just taking your cues from other people, and that's causing you to pursue some hyper competitive or suboptimal strategy. And i.e., how do you break away and find those blue oceans? How do you find genuinely new and good things to be pursuing, rather than just imitate, right? Failed lines of thinking and effort that other people have pursued. And I think our politics is so stagnant. It's so tribal. It's very rare to see anything new in politics. It just feels like this race to the bottom. And to me, just knowing about Gerard, right? When I get in there, I feel like it's less of technical applications of, specific lessons he taught, and more just this vibe of like, I'm here, the system is diseased, it doesn't work, it's corrupt, and I will just continually be on the lookout for ways to break through, ways to do something different, right? Because that's the only way things are going to change. Just no more politics as usual.
Yeah, it's a scapegoating machine up there, and understanding how the sausage is made, I think, could give you an edge in being able to navigate it, perhaps.
That's the hope. Let's see.
Hey, I appreciate your time. How can people who are fans of what you're doing support you or get involved with your campaign?
Thank you. Yeah, it's my name.com, blakemasters.com. If you go to blakemasters.com, you can sign up to volunteer. Whether you're in Arizona or anywhere else, you can still make phone calls for us. If you could throw in 10 or 20 bucks, fundraising is always very important in politics. That matters. But check out what I have on my website. And, if you want to help me get in there, shoot us an email and we'll figure out a way to put you to work.
What's the atmosphere right now on the ground in Arizona in your race?
It's good. There's, the polls are all over the place, and people use polls for, sort of all sorts of nefarious reasons. You can pay a pollster to say whatever you want, but if you aggregate all the polls, most show me within striking distance of first place. There's even a pretty prestigious one out that has me narrowly in the lead. So I think I'm poised to win this thing. And late primary. It's in August, so I still have about 3 months. But my data shows that if I basically raise enough money and spread the word, right, when people hear messaging from myself and also my two top competitors, they choose me. So if I do my job and get the word out, boom, that's it. I'll win the primary. And then in this environment, look, it's always hard to beat a Democrat incumbent, but in this environment, in Arizona is still, it leans Republican. I think I'd crush Mark Kelly. I think I'd beat him by 5 points. So it's never exactly easy, but if I work hard, man, I really think I'm going to win this thing. And that'll be a huge boon to the country. I'll tell you that.
Well, very good. And best of luck. It's exciting to see. Let's shake things up, right?
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I will join you again soon if you'll have me back. And always great fun to talk to you, David.
All right. Take care.